We are getting closer and closer to finishing Generation 7 of Pokemon, and as we go on to Generation 8 here, we're about to face some very new changes. And while some are going to be good and some are going to be bad, that's not the point of this video. Let's recap Generation 7 in terms of the 18 Pokemon types we have, and see how they rank against each other. To compare all the different types, I put them into a tier list ranked S through D. The tiers turned out pretty even, with every tier either having 3 or 4 Pokemon types in them. As is important in any ranking system, I want to make sure that you guys know this is my opinion, it can ultimately be different from yours, and there's other factors that I may not consider when evaluating this. However, I have played Pokemon competitively for the past 3 generations, and I do think I note a lot of important factors to consider when ranking all of these types. And with that all said, let's get this video started. Keep in mind that I'm going from rank D to rank S, and not inherently rank number 18 to rank number 1. Now, what factors am I considering when I'm evaluating these Pokemon types? Well, I'm considering the offensive capabilities, the defensive capabilities, the average stats of the Pokemon with these different types, the ranks of Pokemon in a competitive setting, as well as their usage in their given tier, as that's one of the few ways to gauge how often people use certain mons. I'm also factoring the perks and quirks of each Pokemon type, such as Grass types being immune to Powder moves, Dark types being immune to Prankster, Ghosts not being trapped by Arena Trap or Shadow Tag. So this is supposed to be a holistic evaluation. I'm thinking moves, any Pokemon with these types. Basically, if this type was removed from the game, would it make the game more broken or less broken? Alright, let's hop into the first type. The first mention in rank D is Bug. Unfortunately, Bug just hasn't had the best stats overall. As makes sense since a lot of the bug Pokemon you encounter in-game are usually early on and they don't take a lot of levels to get to their ultimate evolution. Bug moves are decent in power on physical and special side respectively in terms of X-Scissor and Bug Buzz, but really most of their moves are outclassed by other types. Quiver Dance is a really good stat boosting move, but not enough Mons are really able to abuse it. And Fell Stinger is a notable move, but it's too gimmicky to really be able to pull off reliably. The most notable thing about Bug type is U-Turn, which is a move very often used by all types of Mons, which is always used for the sake of momentum, and what's nice about that versus Volt Switch is that it'll never fall to an immunity. However, it is a contact move, so you may face damage from Rough Skin, Rocky Helmet, or Flame Body. Though it is worth noting that Bug has one of the newest hazards to the game, which is Sticky Web, and that lowers a grounded Pokemon's speed by 1 stage upon switching. While it's a useful hazard, not enough Mons, especially Bug-type Mons, are able to learn it. But long story short, Bug is just not that great offensively, it doesn't have that many great defensive capabilities either, and kinda just mediocre moves in general. Next one on my list is Normal, and it's kind of ironic mentioning this one because Normal is actually one of the best teams you can have for a monotype battle. However, as it stands, it's kind of lackluster. It's resisted by Rock and Steel, and Ghost is also immune to it. Sure, it's also immune to Ghost, but that's the only technical type advantage it has. It's also weak to fighting. What's kind of ironic about Normal in the overused tier is that the only normal type Mon, or at least part normal type Mon in OU, is Mega Lopunny, and really one of its best utilities is because it has Scrappy, meaning that it can hit everything, while Normal usually doesn't. Now, one of the benefits of Normal, though, it has some of the best priority moves in the game, between Feint, which is +2 priority, Quick Attack with +1 priority, and then Extreme Speed, which has some of the highest base power priority moves in the game with +2 priority. In addition, I think it's worth noting some other normal type moves such as Baton Pass, Protect, and Substitute. While Baton Pass isn't really used that often in a competitive context, it's still a decent move overall, but removing Protect and Substitute from the game would definitely make the game a lot more hyper-offensive. Plus, healing moves like Heal Bell, Soft Boiled, and Wish would also be gone if Normal was gone. I would say losing Wish is the biggest game changer, as there's alternatives to Soft Boiled like Synthesis and alternatives to Heal Bell like Aromatherapy. In addition, you could replace Detect with Protect, but it's not nearly as versatile and also has less PP. Normal isn't that great defensively because its only immunity is Ghost and everything else is taken neutrally. Offensively, Normal really isn't used that much unless it's Stab for similar reasons, except it has even more resistances and immunities than it does defensively. Additionally, the best normal offensive moves, being Return and Hyper Voice, don't have secondary effects. So ultimately Normal has a diverse pool of moves, but offensively and defensively it's pretty lackluster. And the last one that I have in the D tier is Poison. So Poison definitely has some perks. It has the move Toxic, which is a residual move. A Poison type has a 100% chance of landing Toxic, and Poison types are also immune to Toxic. In addition, Poison also has Toxic Spikes, one of the only hazards in the game, and it's unique in that it deals residual damage, and grounded Poison types can actually remove Toxic Spikes when they switch in. Poison types are most formidable in the current metagame in a defensive form, and that's certainly manifested by the fact that Toxapex is the only OU Pokemon that is part Poison. Poison is unfortunately not that great of an offensive typing. It's super effective against Grass and Fairy, but half of the Grass types and half of the Fairy types in OU are part Steel, therefore they're just immune to Poison. So in conclusion, Poison is pretty good defensively and it has some gimmicks, but it's rather lackluster offensively, and being primarily defensive means that you're susceptible to setup. And that's it for the D tiers. Let's move on to the C tier. Let's start with Fighting. So Fighting type is pretty good offensively. It has a lot of really good moves, especially on the physical side, being Close Combat, Drain Punch, Sacred Sword, Superpower, and Mach Punch. It also has a decent setup move in the form of Bulk Up. Now on the special side, it's a little more lackluster. It does have Vacuum Wave, which is interesting that Fighting has both a physical and special priority move. But then its other main hard-hitting special move is Focus Blast, and as we know, Focus Blast is called Focus Miss for its 70% accuracy. Also, what annoys me about Focus Blast is there's not a lot of Fighting-type Pokemon that are able to abuse its special side for the sake of more power and getting stabbed from it, because most Fighting types are physically based. Now there's definitely a benefit to being a type that has more physically based moves, and that's like taking out the more special walls such as Chansey and Blissey, and plus you don't need to worry about the effects of an opposing Assault Vest. Still, it can make a Fighting type that much more predictable of a moveset, and also one of the most formidable abilities in the game, Intimidate, is Fighting's biggest weakness. There are a few Fighting types in the OU tier, but they're pretty flimsy. Keldeo is definitely one of the bulkier OU Fighting types, and its signature move Secret Sword allows you to hit on the defensive side using your special attack. Unfortunately, Fighting types aren't that great defensively, for one because they're pretty weak on the special defense side, but also they don't really have recovery moves outside of the occasional Drain Punch. Thus, Fighting types are pretty good offensively, particularly on the physical side, but they're pretty weak on the specially defensive side, and ultimately they're pretty predictable as a type. Next on our list in the D tier is Grass. Now Grass types have a pretty unique pool of moves, such as the Powder moves being Spore, Sleep Powder, and Stun Spore. Grass types are also immune to those moves. Also has Leech Seed, and is immune to that as well. There's also Grassy Terrain, with being able to essentially have lefties recovery to any grounded Mon, as well as boost Grass type moves to a grounded Mon by 1.5. There's also a decent amount of offensive moves unique to Grass, such as Trop Kick, Wood Hammer, Solar Beam, Seed Flare, Seed Bomb, Power Whip, Giga Drain, Horn Leech, Grass Knot, Energy Ball, and probably some more that I haven't mentioned. The big problem with Grass though is that it has a couple of good types that it's effective against, being Water, Rock, and Ground, but it also is resisted by a lot, and it's also weak to a lot defensively. Grass is actually like Poison in a lot of ways, in that it's immune to a lot of things of its own typing, except in this case, Grass is actually weaker to more than Poison is. However, this is the first type that we've talked about that benefits from a particular weather condition, in this case sun. While becoming even more weak to fire, Synthesis becomes stronger, and also a lot of Grass types have chlorophyll, so they'll become twice as fast in the sun. Still, Grassy Terrain will probably be the most common outside condition that will affect the gameplay in OU, and still that gimmick alone is not enough to outbalance the amount of weaknesses that Grass has. With that said, let's move on to the last type in C tier for me, Ice. Now Ice is easily one of the best offensive types, and that's because it takes on some of the most common types in OU, Dragon, Flying, Grass, and Ground. It has a decent variety of offensive capabilities, on the special side being Ice Beam and Blizzard, and on the physical side being Ice Punch and Icicle Crash. Even the 10% chance to freeze attached to those is pretty dangerous. As a whole, Ice pales in comparison to Water in a lot of ways, and Water even resists Ice. Sure, there's Freeze Dry, but it's a fairly weak, nuanced move that doesn't feel like much more than a gimmick. Ice is fairly limited on the physical side, with Icicle Crash really being the strongest reliable move. The limited physical ice moves out there is exactly why Kyurem B is even in OU, which is also the only ice type in OU. Despite having uber-rated stats, it just doesn't have the coverage, primarily in physical ice, to really be that formidable in Ubers. And defensively, the only notable thing to say about ice is that it's the only type that is immune to hail. That and Alolan Ninetales with Snow Warning and Aurora Veil makes for a formidable Icemon, but outside of that it only resists itself and has 4 weaknesses, so it's far from a defensive mon. With that said, Hidden Power Ice will definitely be a move you'll see on a number of mons to try catching a Lando, but outside of that, Ice as a whole really is limited. Moving on to the B tier, starting with Dragon. You may find it surprising to see Dragon this low, especially 2 gens ago, Dragon was practically the most broken type. The reason of that, of course, is because Dragon just has an overall high BST because a lot of Dragons are inherently pseudo-legendaries or legendaries. However, stats alone are not enough to carry a mon, and Dragon proves that. Even offensively, Dragon is kind of weird. When it comes to special, you either have Draco Meteor, which inherently has to lower your special attack 2 stages after 1 use, or you have Dragon Pulse, which is a base 85 move with no secondary effect. On the physical side, you have base 80 power Dragon Claw with no secondary effect, or Outrage, which is base 120 but then you lock yourself in. And as broken as a choice banded Kyurem Black's Outrage used to be, having fairy types now to check them is definitely notable. Fairies are not only immune to Dragon, but they're also super effective offensively against Dragon. Not to mention there's a lot of fairies in OU. Further, Tapu Fini's Misty Terrain makes it so Dragon moves do half the damage they would otherwise do while the terrain is up. Dragons fare pretty well defensively, having 4 resistances, and some mons having Roost or Recover. The other notable factor I would say about Dragon is Dragon Tail, which is an okay phasing move, but it does have 90% accuracy and of course negative priority. Ultimately, Dragon's main claim to fame is a really nice BST. Outside of that, it has okay attack moves and decent defenses, but the amount of changes in the metagame, particularly involving fairies, make Dragons a lot more neutralized than they used to be. Next on our list is Electric. Starting off, let's talk about defenses. Electric is a pretty good defensive type because its only weakness is ground. The notable OU mons that are at least part Electric are Rotom Wash, Zapdos, and Tapu Koko. They all have some form of recovery, which definitely helps with their defensive capabilities, though Zapdos is easily the most reliable. A lot of Electric mons unfortunately just don't have the HP and defense stats to be able to take a hit as well as you'd want them to. Offensively, Electric definitely reigns on the special side. Between Thunderbolt, Discharge, Volt Switch, and even Thunder in certain circumstances, Electric moves on the special side can be quite formidable. However, on the physical side, Electric is quite lackluster. One of the most common physical Electric moves is Wild Charge, and even though it's just base 90, it still deals a quarter of recoil. This is why outside of Zero Aura, there's basically no physical Electric attackers that are reigning in higher tiers of competitive Pokemon. Outside of this, Electric has a few claims to fame: Volt Switch, immunity to paralysis, and inducing paralysis. Volt Switch is a nice move to get momentum without making contact with the other Pokemon. However, ground types can come in to absorb it and then you lose all that momentum. Paralysis is definitely still a formidable status condition, however paralysis has been nerfed instead of being a quarter of the speed to half the speed, and also you can miss Thunder Wave now with a 90% accuracy. Ultimately, Volt Switch and Paralysis are Electric type's main claim to fame. They unfortunately don't have the stats to utilize their defensive capabilities, and they're pretty predictable offensively due to being primarily special attackers. Next on the list is Rock type. Rock types usually have pretty good defensive stats, but unfortunately Rock is weak to a lot of things. This is somewhat counteracted by the fact that when they're in the sand, number 1 they're immune to sand, but number 2 they get a 1.5 times special defense boost when in the sand. Still, that depends on sand being up, and with sand no longer being indefinite since Gen 6, that kind of defensive boost is no longer as dependable. Offensively, Stone Edge is easily the most well-known Rock type move. It's really good in terms of power and typing, but it's called Stone Mist for a reason with its 80% accuracy. Rock type moves really get a short end of the stick offensively. The next most powerful versatile move is Rock Slide, and it only has base 75 power and still not even 100% accuracy, but 90% accuracy. On the special side, Power Gem is the only thing that's particularly reliable, and that doesn't have a secondary effect, and it's only base 80 power. Physical Rock type moves have really become kind of a necessary evil in the metagame, and that's just how it is. Sure, there are nuanced moves like Diamond Storm with Diancie, but it's too nuanced to really consider as a whole for Rock types. However, the reason that I think Rock types are as high as they are in my rankings is because of none other than Stealth Rock. Stealth Rock is referred to as the best move in the game, and not to go into immense details about it as a lot of us know what Stealth Rock is about. It's easily the most versatile hazard, and it's also good at gauging what type of mon you're facing in terms of set. Outside of that, Rock Polish is usually not used much because rock types are usually too slow to really abuse it, and Head Smash is unfortunately not on a lot of good mons that could use it. So while relatively mediocre when talking about offensive and defensive capabilities really, both Stone Edge and Stealth Rock are necessary evils of the metagame. And this brings us to our final B-tiered type, Ground. When facing an upper tier ground type Pokemon, it is very evident that an impending earthquake will likely come your way. Though no secondary effect, a 100% accurate 100 base power earthquake is still pretty dangerous. Further, Ground does very well for itself offensively as it's super effective to 5 types. There are also decent alternatives to Earthquake, especially in the case of grassy terrain, and these include Drill Run and High Horsepower. Ground types are pretty limited when it comes to stab, especially offensive moves. However, Earth Power with a 10% chance to lower the opponent's special defense is still a decent move that works for itself. I also think Ground has a fair balance of immunities, resistances, and weaknesses. Further, the move Spikes is a ground type move, and this is a reliable damaging hazard that affects any grounded Pokemon the same way no matter your typing. Further, the moves Land's Wrath, Thousand Waves, and Thousand Arrows, while exclusive to Zygarde, Zygarde does have multiple forms in which they can use it, and they can be pretty exploitable in the right circumstances, whether it's to trap a Pokemon with Thousand Waves or to hit any Pokemon with Thousand Arrows. Between a limited move pool on the special attack side, a diverse move pool on the physical side, and pretty balanced offensive and defensive capabilities, that's why Ground is the last B tier type for me. Now for the A tier. The first type on the list for me in A tier is Psychic. Now back in Gen 1, Psychic was easily the most broken type, but since then, especially starting in Gen 2, it started to get some checks, such as from Steel and Dark types. The top Psychic types are able to combat this because a lot of Psychic types are able to acquire Focus Blast. And while that is great coverage all in all, Focus Blast is known as Focus Miss for a reason. Psychic types are certainly predominantly special attackers, which does make their offensive capabilities fairly predictable. However, the universal utility of Psyshock, allowing you to use your special attack to attack the physical defense of the opponent, is a really nice feature of Psychic types. Psychic types also have an overall higher special defense stat. They're kind of like the fighting types of the special side. However, again, Psyshock does make them more universal. Further, there's a lot of tricks and gimmicks that are attached to the Psychic typing. This includes, but is not limited to, Trick Room, Trick, Stored Power, Psywave, Psycho Shift, Mirror Coat, Lunar Dance, Recover, Healing Wish, Hypnosis, Future Sight, Cosmic Power, Amnesia, Agility, and Calm Mind. I would say one of Psychic's main weaknesses is the combination of a lower physical defense stat overall and also being susceptible to the universal knockoff. Also on the physical side, outside of Psyshock, there's really not that many physical moves for Psychic outside of Zen Headbutt, which is just base 80 power and even 90% accuracy at that. It may also be worth noting Psychic Terrain adding a 1.5 times boost to Psychic moves, especially with Tapu Lele. Ultimately, Psychic is basically a better version of fighting, but on the special side, and that it has more tricky and gimmicky moves. Next on our list is Flying. You may find Flying to be a little bit surprising at this high of a tier, between its okay level of resistances and weaknesses. However, there are definitely perks to being at least part Flying. While you do have an inherent higher weakness to Stealth Rock, you are essentially immune to every other hazard. Further, Defog has become a pretty centralizing hazard removing move. A caveat to this though is that you won't be able to take advantage of any of the terrains that the Tapus set up. The recovery move Roost and the speed boosting move Tailwind are also a part of the Flying type. Flying has an okay pool of offensive moves such as Acrobatics, Aerial Ace, Air Slash, Brave Bird, Bounce, Drill Peck, Hurricane. The biggest problem with these moves are they're not super universal between all the Flying types. So overall, due to a decent move pool, particularly offensively and also featuring Defog, and the immunity to most hazards, that's why I find Flying to be as high of a tier as it is. Next on our list is Fairy. Fairy comes in as the newest type added to the Pokemon metagame, and it's super significant as being a check or even a counter to both Dark and Dragon. From a defensive standpoint, it's in a really good position, being only weak to poison and steel, which are not that common of offensive moves. And again, offensively, Fairy is pretty good, being super effective against Dark Dragon and fighting. Fairy's biggest weakness comes from its lack of overall moves. Physically, it only has Play Rough really, which is 90 base power and 90% accuracy, and then on the special side you have a mixture of Moonblast, Dazzling Gleam, and Draining Kiss, and Moonblast is easily the best of those three moves, but not everyone gets it on the Fairy side. Further, the best fairies in the game are either the Tapus, which are able to set up a terrain when they come in, or they stand really good on their own, as in Clefable's case, or they have a really good dual typing, such as in Magiarna and Mega Mawile's case. Ultimately, Fairy's a pretty good type offensively and defensively, and has pretty good BST to back it up, but a more expansive move pool would be required to put it into the highest tier. The final type in this tier is Fire. There's three main reasons why Fire is as good as it is, and that's related to the burn status, its benefits in the sun, and also its offensive capabilities. Burn is one of the most highly sought out statuses in the game. Granted, a lot of people use Scald to burn, but it's because of how damaging the effect is to physical attackers. Burn has been slightly nerfed in the fact that it now only deals 6% residual instead of 12% residual, but I think that was a fair balance to safely counteract the fact that it's already pretty damaging in terms of having a physical attack. Sun is also one of the only weathers that actually boosts a type's offense. In the Sun, Fire type moves are boosted by 1.5, and one of their weaknesses, Water, is halved in damage. And in terms of offense, between physical and special, Fire is probably one of the best types there is. Still, there is definitely a bias to the special side for Fire, as the best physical moves are basically Sacred Fire, Flare Blitz, Fire Punch, and Fire Fang. And those moves aren't always versatile for all the Fire types, but most of the best Fire mons either have Sacred Fire or Flare Blitz. On the special side, you have a plethora of moves, such as Overheat, Mind Blown, Magma Storm, Lava Plume, Flamethrower, Heat Wave, Fire Blast, Eruption, and probably more. You also have more nuanced but definitely powerful moves such as Fiery Dance and V-Create. Outside of offense, the main moves you're going to use that are Fire type would be Sunny Day, as we talked about, just another way to set up the sun, and then Will-O-Wisp, which is just a guaranteed way to put on the status rather than relying on a burn chance. Ultimately, Fire's biggest weakness is that it has a fair amount of common weaknesses in OU and that it's weak to Stealth Rock. Still, between the benefits of Sun, Burn itself, and a diverse offensive move pool, that's why Fire deserves to be pretty close to the top in terms of types. Now for an update. I kinda struggled with this type, but I did ultimately decide to move Ghost down to the last type on the A tier. Ghost is really good offensively and occasionally good defensively, only in cases of like Aegislash and Doublade, and the only Ghost left in OU is Blacephalon. Even Gengar's dropped off at this point. However, offensively, this type is incredible. Normal and Ghost are at a stalemate, but Dark is otherwise the only resistance to Ghost. This leaves the checks to Ghost moves to be either Chansey or the forms of Greninja, the forms of Tyranitar, or Mega Gyarados. In OU, Greninja would be the most likely absorber of Shadow Ball, but not being a defensive mon, it's still going to take a fair chunk from it. The reason I decided to lower Ghost's rank ultimately is because of its predictability. Especially in this knockoff generation, Ghost has to be an offensive powerhouse, and that tends to be because of the strong Ghost special attackers. Further, Ghosts rely on their gimmick Destiny Bond to try to trick other players to not attack them in certain cases. Physically, there's just not a lot of moves that are versatile in the Ghost physical area, and those really are just Shadow Sneak, technically Nightshade, and Shadow Claw. There's also Shadow Punch, but with base 60 power it's not particularly strong. When it comes to special attacks, Shadow Ball is really the strongest you're going to get reliably. A base 80 power move with a 20% chance to lower SpDef is strong, but not that strong. The only ways to get a Ghost move to really be stronger is to status something and then use Hex. Outside of that, you're not really going to see the other gimmicky Ghost moves such as Confuse Ray or Curse. Ultimately, Ghost is a fairly flimsy type, but it does have great offensive capabilities and very few mons are going to be able to resist its hits. It's also worth noting that Ghost is the only type that isn't trapped by Arena Trap or Shadow Tag. Between the gimmicks, the offensive prowess, and the weak defenses, I would say that's why Ghost deserves to be in the A tier. Now let's get into the final tier, the top tier, S tier, and we're going to start with Water. One reason Water is unequivocally S tier is because it's a great typing both offensively and defensively. Every Water Pokemon in OU has a dual typing, and this dual typing is both good for offensive coverage and for resistances. Further, water has great coverage physically and specially. On the special side, you have moves such as Water Spout, Water Shuriken, Water Pulse at times, Steam Eruption in nuanced circumstances, Scald is a notorious move, occasionally Muddy Water, notorious Hydro Pump. And on the physical side, you have just as good circumstances. Aqua Jet, yet another typing that has a priority move on both the physical and special side. There's also Aqua Tail, the occasional Crab Hammer, Waterfall, and Liquidation. There's also a couple water moves that can catch people by surprise, most notably Whirlpool. In certain ways, water is like a better version of fire and like a better version of ice. Like fire, it gets a 1.5 times boost in water moves when in the rain. Fire damage is also halved in the rain, so the effects of rain are far more disastrous for fire than drought is for water. Also, there are a lot more Pokemon that are able to abuse the rain with their abilities versus circumstances such as in Sun and in Hail. There's just more better Mons that are able to abuse Swift Swim, and then there are some Mons that are able to abuse Dry Skin. Plus there are other abilities that really help with the rain, or really just in general, but are just lesser used, such as Water Bubble and Rain Dish. Water is also better than ice in the sense that they both have very similar coverage, but water resists ice. Also, a lot of water Pokemon can learn ice moves, while not a lot of ice Pokemon can learn water moves. Between a diverse move pool and a lot of Mons that are either really good at offense or really good at defense in terms of water types, that's why water deserves to be at the top. Now for the second last type, Steel. So let's talk about its main strong suit first. It has the best defensive typing in the game. It has 10 resistances and 1 immunity. Along with that, Steel types inherently have a lot of physical defense and special defense. In addition, they're pretty slow, so they're either used as defensive walls or bulky offensives. It is worth mentioning that Steel got slightly nerfed in Generation 6 by no longer resisting Ghost and Dark. However, Ghost and Dark have very similar coverage, so it almost serves the same purpose. Additionally, Steel found a new resistance to Fairy. Overall, offensively, Steel types usually rely on physical offense, as special offense usually relies on Flash Cannon. Physical offense-wise though, they have a fair diverse pool of moves, starting with Iron Head and Iron Tail. These moves have set damage and are fairly strong. However, they also have the moves Heavy Slam and Gyro Ball, which are best used by Pokemon who are heavy and are slow, which tends to be Steel types. Steel also has a priority move in the form of Bullet Punch, which is really good to have when you're an inherently slow type. Outside of that, the moves you'll see most likely are going to be Anchor Shot from Delmise, or Shift Gear between Klinklang and Magearna, and more occasionally you'll see Atomize, which actually increases your speed but also lowers your weight, and then Iron Defense. So all in all, Steel's really good because of the amount of resistances it has, and there's moves that go really well with its typing, aka based on weight and speed. Plus, a lot of them are really inherently bulky. Alright, now on to the last type, which I do find to be the best type overall. Dark. Between decent resistances and type effectiveness, a rather wide pool of moves that include gimmicks and setup, and of course the notorious knockoff, that's why Dark is supreme. Dark is a really nice defensive type in an OU, even though all of the Dark types in OU are usually offensive. Think about how unusually hard it is to take down a Greninja. The reason Dark is so good offensively is honestly due to knockoff. A base 65 move that gets a 1.5 times boost when you have an item to knock off the opponent. So many things can learn knockoff, and it's such an automatic utility for so many teams that the metagame would absolutely change without it. It was used decently in 5th gen, but once it got the power boost from 20 to 65, it has become quite broken. Physically offensive Dark types usually rely on knockoff, though there are a couple of other moves that can be used as well. Beat Up, while gimmicky, can be used, but mostly we're talking about moves like Crunch, Sucker Punch, Foul Play, Night Slash, and Pursuit. Pursuit is unique in that it's the only move to guaranteed trap something, aka even if a ghost wants to get out, you can use Pursuit to guaranteed hit it before it switches out. Sucker Punch is a unique priority move in that it will only work if the opposing Pokemon attacks and its priority and or attack is slower. On the special side, you'll really only see Dark Pulse, which is base 80 power and a 20% chance to flinch. Gimmick-wise, there's a number of moves that Dark takes hold of. This includes Taunt, Switcheroo, a form of trick, Parting Shot, Memento, Hone Claws, Nasty Plot, and don't forget that Dark is immune to Prankster for whatever reason. So with both pretty good defensive and offensive typing, but primarily because of knockoff, Dark type is the best in the game right now. The metagame would change significantly if Dark types moves and Pokemon were to be removed. And with that, in about half an hour, we have covered the 18 types. Again, this is ultimately my opinion, though I do have a competitive analysis on it here, and this is just covering how it is in the latest metagame. I'm sure I didn't cover every single thing in this video, and I would appreciate discussion in the comments section below. Leave a comment and please like and subscribe. Thanks for watching. Peace.